potential of smaller economies by institutionalizing new aid packages in the form of mega connectivity projects and infrastructure projects that is having the exact opposite impact of their growth potential for these very smaller countries. The initial promise of greater connectivity and robust infrastructure is running the danger of pushing countries into indebtedness towards a few countries compromising sovereignty and democratic participation in the 21st century world order that is strongly believed would be more accommodating than that of the last century. The rise of the Asia Pacific, or the Indo Pacific as we would prefer to call it, is currently real and it is durable. However, conflicts of interest and at times deliberate attempts at deepening of conflicts in the region have made sober nations worried. The RCEP negotiations among the 16 countries in the Indo-Pacific are taking place against this background. From a political and a strategic perspective, India being a member of RCEP is natural and something that will further reinforce India's Act East policy. It will also give a boost to the concept of the Indo-Pacific as an inclusive, open, rules-based order, and it could help strengthen the economic pillar of our relations with the East and Southeast Asia, and also perhaps take the people-to-people relations to a higher level. And this was reconfirmed and reiterated by our Prime Minister most recently when he participated in the RCEP summit in Singapore. That said, whether it is the WTO Doha round, or whether it's the RCEP negotiations, or whether other trading arrangements that India has been participating in, call it Mercosur with the Latin American region, or with the ASEAN countries, the FTA, or even SAFTA closer home with the SAARC, within the SAARC framework, where India, because of its immediate neighborhood involved, and in spite of the fact that one member of the SAFTA negotiations refused to actually honor the commitments it had undertaken in SAFTA, and where India, again, as the biggest country in the entire grouping, had in fact made unilateral concessions to the least developed countries of the grouping. We must, as Indian negotiators, as Indian experts, as Indian economists, certainly take, I think, a deeper look, even as we participate in all of these plurilateral or multilateral trade arrangements. Certainly take an assessment, maybe a performance audit, of where we stand as far as the global trading system is concerned and whether it has worked well for us. And it is against this background that I thought I'd just share some of my thoughts, which I thought will kickstart discussions in the subsequent segments that you would undertake. It is my belief that India definitely has benefited and performed better whenever it has traded with the world. And therefore, it is certainly in India's interest to ensure a rules-based multilateral trading system with equal and equitable burden sharing. After all, nations trade not for trade's sake, but as a means to development, and therefore it is important for trading nations to assess their comparative advantages while seeking market access or while negotiating. And therefore, unilateral moves or anything that distorts trade from the natural comparative advantages that countries enjoy in such trading arrangements is naturally a cause of concern. Of course, trade negotiations are complex, and trade negotiators naturally have to assess that while making their commitments, they remain mindful of the sensitive sectors. For example, in India, it is the agriculture sector, it is the small and micro sectors which create jobs for the poorest segments of the community that are of serious concern to us. And that has, of course, been a concern to us throughout the Uruguay round, the Doha round, or elsewhere as well, whether it was a participation in the RCEP or other negotiations. And I recall that when I was posted in Geneva, and as the delegate to UNCTAD representing India, a constant refrain that I heard amongst the developing country delegates was about the subsidies, that again they were trade distorting subsidies, where it was the developed rich countries that had subsidized their farmers and their farming sector so heavily and were expecting, constantly badgering the developing countries to open up our agriculture sector. And I remember at that time some of the negotiators repeatedly reiterating that I would rather be a cow in Europe than a poor farmer in India or any other developing country. Such was the nature of these trade distortions. And so when it comes to Government of India taking a very rigid position on negotiations in very sensitive sectors, like agriculture or the micro and medium enterprise sectors, I think it is important for all of us who are participating here to remain mindful of that very important element, because these are directly linked to livelihood issues of the poorest segments of the community. And therefore, while governments must support these sensitive sectors, it is, I think, not in our interest to make them so dependent that they fail to remain competitive or they even fail to launch themselves. Similarly, comes to the small and micro and medium enterprise, I think to the extent that we can support them evolve, it is important. I recall again my days in Geneva, where there was an anticipation and expectation that after the textiles agreement, where the quota-free regime would have been removed, and India would have been perhaps the biggest beneficiary, because we would have perhaps, having a complete value chain of the entire textiles and apparel sector benefited. Somehow, I think we got our story not quite right and failed to remain competitive. And there are others, including our immediate neighborhood, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Vietnam, and others. I can talk of so many other very successful stories about how they did better and what is it that India could learn from those stories as well. Another area of concern, of course, for us is the growing trade deficit, especially with China. And so while you would hear experts again talk in terms of trade deficit, or export need not necessarily be counted only in terms of your exports and imports, and sometimes it's good to be part of the value chains. It's good to encourage and allow competition, and imports is not such a bad thing, because it gives your population access to, of course, cheaper goods and helps you be part of the entire value chain as well. I think we need to take cognizance where a trade deficit continues to grow to the tune of $60 billion, and then India fails to get that kind of desired market access from a country such as China. And so it is, I think, and I hope that this symposium, certainly the Indian members or the experts in India, would be able to take a hard look at where is it that India has gone wrong, what is it that we could do better, maybe some kind of a performance audit on whether the efficacy of the WTO or other plurilateral arrangements, including the ASEAN-India FTA. The sense we get is that perhaps we have not benefited as much, because it was our expectation that when we negotiated the ASEAN-India FTA in goods, we would have expected services and investments as well to have been honored and committed and implemented, but that has not happened. And meanwhile, the RCEP negotiations have started, where there is once again pressure for India to price open segments like goods, but then the negotiating countries perhaps are not giving us as much comfort on other segments, including services and investments. So we need to, I think, and I would urge all the participants today to perhaps have a look at this and see whether these plurilateral arrangements, whether it's WTO, the ASEAN FTA, or even the various CICA arrangements that India has with Singapore, with ROK, with Thailand, which have moved at different stages of being discussed, and whether they have really helped us, or whether there requires a course correction for India and for other participating countries. And of course, the course correction need not necessarily all be external, and I'm not going to just blame the external trading partners or negotiating partners in it. I think we need to also take a hard-nosed look at our own ability and whether we have somehow, by overprotecting, not failed ourselves, or not protected the right elements and perhaps failed ourselves. Why is it that we've not become part of the value chains? And then given the fact that, apart from trade negotiations and participating in the global trade system, we talk about our strengths being the demographic dividend. And whether by protecting ourselves we are not keeping some of our population actually deprived of access to various goods. Especially, for example, if you were to look at other middle-income countries beyond India, and see their requirements of energy needs or nutrition needs, and whether we have actually been too protectionist and that is the reason for it, or otherwise. These are just some of the thoughts that I just thought I'd just share with you. It's not for me to give the solutions to it. I think it's really for the experts present here today. But I would definitely like to thank JEF and RIS for having organized this very important aspect. It certainly has a bearing for India, as we aspire to transform ourselves into a modern society and leapfrog into the knowledge economy of the 21st century. And our efforts at fundamental transformations domestically are matched with greater efforts in contributing to consolidation of the global governance regimes around multilateralism. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks, Ambassador Saran, for extremely rich and extremely comprehensive address today. You very rightly pointed out importance of services sector. As you might have noticed in this program, we have a specific session on trade and also on services sector, giving its importance not only for India but also for ASEAN countries. You also emphasized on centrality of multilateral institutions. Fortunately, next month when Japan would take over presidency of G20, Japan has already identified two very important themes out of the 5. One is on the issue related to centrality of multilateralism, and second, again you captured in your address, is rising indebtedness of the countries. So that's a specific theme which Japan has identified as a priority area for G20 discussion. In fact, the academic forum is meeting in Tokyo on 4th and 5th of December. Friends, with this we come to close of our inaugural session. As you might have seen in the agenda, there is a brief photo session. So the participants from the ASEAN countries who are here as delegates for Asia Pacific Forum, I would like to request them to come here on the dais. As Secretary East, Ambassador Preeti Saran is sitting here. We would have a group photo with her and with other dignitaries on the dais. Please join us here for group photo. So Ambassador Amar Sinha is in chair. I would like to invite all the other speakers, the panelists here, to join us for the session that is extremely interesting and would be focusing on trade and impact on new technologies.